Welcome back to Inside Vietnam. I'm glad you're here, and I mean that because the story we've got for you today is one that sat with me for a long time after we finished filming it. Our man is Declan Mulryan, 54 years old, from Limerick in Ireland. 28 years as a Garda, that's the Irish police force. And by any measure, a man who spent the better part of his working life reading people for a living. Interviewing them, watching them, knowing when something didn't add up. Packed. Knowing when something didn't add up. He came to Vietnam the way a lot of our contributors come to Vietnam, looking for something, not entirely sure what. He found the weather. He found the food. He found a life that made more sense than the one he'd left behind. And then he found a woman, and a condo, and a decision that would test everything he thought he knew about himself. I'm not going to tell you what happened. That's Declan's job. What I will tell you is that this one's going to stick with you. Not because Declan is unusual, but because he isn't. Because the thing that made him vulnerable is the same thing that made him good at his job for 3 decades. And that, right there, is the part that keeps me up at night. Here's his story. In his own words, "I'm not here for your sympathy. I'll tell you that for nothing, right at the start, so we're clear on what this is. I made decisions. I made them with the information I chose to gather, using the judgment I chose to gather, using the judgment I chose to apply, and they cost me. That's it. That's the whole story, really, except obviously it isn't, or you'd already be watching something else. My name is Declan Mulryan. I'm 54. I'm from Limerick. And if you know anything about Limerick, you'll know that sympathy isn't really part of the cultural vocabulary there anyway, so we should get along grand. I joined the Garda Síochána at 23. Did 28 years, most of it in Henry Street Station in Limerick City. I won't pretend it was the most glamorous posting in the force. It wasn't. But it was real work, and it was mine, and I was good at it. You develop a particular way of looking at the world when your job is essentially to stand between people and the worst version of themselves. You learn to read a room before you're fully inside it. You learn to listen to what isn't being said. You develop what I can only describe as a finely tuned instinct for when something is off. That instinct, it turns out, has a blind spot. I'll get to that. I retired in 2017 on a full Garda pension. My wife Sinead and I had separated 2 years before that, formally divorced the year I retired, and she got the house in Dooradoyle, and I got a 1-bedroom flat above a chipper on the Ennis Road, and a standing order for €800 a month. I'm not going to go into the marriage here because it's not what this is about, and because frankly it's none of your business. What I will say is that I told everyone I was grand about it. My daughter, Aoife, my sister, Bridget, my former colleagues at Henry Street, who the 500th, ask with that particular careful casualness that means they already know the answer. Grand, I told them all. Absolutely grand. I was not grand. Here's what my life looked like for 4 years after I retired. I woke up at the same time every morning because 28 years of shift work had made my body forget how to sleep past 6. I made tea. I watched the news. I ate whatever was easiest. Microwave curry, mostly. Sometimes a sandwich from the garage on the corner. I watched a lot of GAA matches that I didn't particularly care about, which if you know me is genuinely alarming because I've cared about hurling since I was 7 years old, and suddenly I was watching matches and not really seeing them. Bridget rang every Sunday at 11:30. She'd ask how I was. I'd say grand. She'd say good, that's great, Declan. And then we'd talk about her kids for 20 minutes, and that would be that. The pension covered everything. I had €95,000 sitting in a credit union account, savings from 30 years of working, and a settlement from the house that I hadn't touched and didn't know what to do with. People would say, "You should invest that, Declan, get it working for you." And I'd nod and think, working for what? Working toward what, exactly? I had no answer to that. After 28 years of knowing exactly what the next thing was, the next shift, the next case, the next review, the next rank to apply for, I had absolutely no idea what the next thing was supposed to be. I was 51 years old, in reasonable health, financially comfortable, and I felt like a car sitting in a lay-by with the engine running and nowhere to go. That's not depression. I want to be clear about that because I've had people try to label it depression, and I don't think it was. Depression is a weight. What I had was more like an absence. I was just parked. Vietnam came into my life at about 1 in the morning on a Tuesday in January 2022. I'd had a couple of glasses of Jameson, which had become a reasonably common occurrence, and I was doing what you do at 1 in the morning when you've had a couple of Jamesons, which is watching YouTube videos of increasingly dubious relevance to your actual life. Some fella from Manchester, big lad, good energy, earring in, the kind of man who calls everyone mate, was doing a walking tour of Da Nang, raving about it. Dot 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 dot. The food, the weather. My first thought was, that's not for me. I'm a Garda from Limerick. I've been to Lanzarote twice and Brussels once for a Europol conference, and that's the full extent of my international experience. Southeast Asia is for gap year students and lads going through midlife crises. My second thought, about 40 minutes and 2 more YouTube videos later, was, what exactly is stopping you? I couldn't come up with a satisfying answer. I looked at the credit union balance. I looked at the credit union balance. I looked at the window, where it was raining the particular Limerick January rain that feels personally directed at you. I thought about Bridget ringing on Sunday. I thought about the microwave curry in the freezer. I booked a 2-week return to Ho Chi Minh City on a Thursday morning, almost before I decided to. The passport I used hadn't been out of the drawer since Brussels in 2009. I rang Bridget and told her I was going to Vietnam for a fortnight. There was a pause. Why Vietnam? She said. And I said, why not Vietnam? Which is not an answer. I know it's not an answer. I know it's not an answer. But the truth was something I didn't have words for yet. That for the first time in 4 years, I'd done something that was purely mine. No standing order. No Sunday call. Just a decision, made at 1 in the morning, by a man who'd spent too long asking other people where they thought they were going. I stood in the departure gate at Shannon Airport in March 2022 with a carry-on bag and a return ticket I already half intended not to use. I had my phone, my pension card, and €95,000 in the credit union back in Limerick. And nobody, not Bridget, not I wife, not a single person on earth, knew exactly where I was going or why. I want you to understand something about that feeling, because it's important to the rest of the story. It wasn't recklessness. It wasn't a crisis. It was something much simpler and, as it turned out, much more dangerous than either of those things. It was the feeling of being alive again. I should have been more careful with it. I want to tell you what Ho Chi Minh City feels like when you step outside the airport for the first time at 7:30 in the morning in March, because it matters to understanding everything that came after. It feels like the world has been turned up, all of it simultaneously. The heat hits you like opening an oven door, not uncomfortable exactly, just total. Like the air itself has weight. The traffic is unlike anything you've encountered unless you've been to a city like this, which I hadn't. Motorbikes everywhere, hundreds of them, thousands maybe, moving in patterns that look chaotic but clearly aren't, weaving and merging and splitting with a fluid logic I couldn't decode for the first 3 days. The horns aren't aggressive the way they are in Dublin or London, they're informational. Here I am, coming through, adjust. And the noise of it, and the smell of it, diesel and something frying and something sweet and drains and flowers, all at once, all the time. I stood outside Tien Son and Airport with my carry-on bag, and I thought, I have absolutely no idea what any of this is. That thought, for a man who'd spent 28 years being the one who knew what things were, felt extraordinary. My copper's brain kicked in immediately, which is the only mode I have. I started cataloging. Exits and entrances. The grab bike drivers clustered near the curb. The taxi touts and how to distinguish them from legitimate operators. The layout of the drop-off zone. It was automatic, like breathing. I wasn't doing it consciously. I was just taking inventory of a new environment, the way I'd taken inventory of every environment since 1989. The habit had kept me functional and relatively safe for 3 decades, and I saw no reason to question it. I was observing. I was in control. I was also, within about 20 minutes of arriving, completely charmed by everything I saw. I won't pretend otherwise. The hotel in District 1 was a narrow 4-story place on a side street off Phia Minh Ji Lao, run by a family, clean, cheap by any standard I'd ever known, about €22 a night. The woman at reception was in her 50s, and spoke enough English to handle logistics, and smiled at me with the warm, slightly amused patience that I would come to understand, was how Vietnamese people generally responded to newly arrived Westerners standing in their lobby looking like stunned cattle. She showed me to my room. I put my bag down. I looked out the window at the street below. Motorbikes. A woman selling banh mi from a cart. A man asleep in a plastic chair outside a phone repair shop. A dog trotting along the pavement with the confident bearing of an animal that owns the place. I went downstairs and had the best bowl of phi one I've ever eaten, sitting on a plastic stool at a cart on the pavement for about €1.20 at 8 o'clock in the morning, sweating in the heat, and I thought I could stay here. Not forever, just longer than 2 weeks. The decision to extend came in stages, which is how I make all decisions, not in a rush of feeling, but in a quiet accumulation of practical evidence. Evidence 1, my pension, which in Limerick covered the flat and the bills and not a great deal else, went roughly 3 times as far here. I did the maths on a napkin in a cafe on Bois Vien Street during the first week. The numbers were not complicated. Evidence 2, the weather. It was 31 degrees in March. In Limerick in March, it had been 8 degrees and raining sideways. I'm not a man who normally lets weather influence major decisions, but I'm also not a man who is particularly enjoying 8 degrees and sideways rain. Evidence 3, and this is the one I'm most honest about now, nobody here looked at me and saw the bloke Cinny Ed had left. Nobody here had known me for 30 years. Nobody here knew anything about me at all except that I was a tall Irish fella in his 50s, who couldn't pronounce Vietnamese and kept accidentally ordering the wrong thing. That was, I cannot explain how much, a relief. I moved from the hotel to a serviced apartment in District 1 at the end of the first 2 weeks. Small place, 1 bedroom, a proper kitchen. I used exactly twice, an air conditioning unit that became my closest relationship in those early months. I paid about €450 a month. I sent Bridget a WhatsApp telling her I was staying on a bit. She sent back a string of question marks and then rang me. I told her I was grand. She said I'd been saying that for 4 years. I said this time I meant it. There was a pause. She let it go. I started learning Vietnamese. 10 words a week, self-imposed, written on index cards that I kept in my shirt pocket and tested myself against on the walk to get coffee every morning. Yin chado shin jado shin shin. Yin jado shin chado. How much? I liked the discipline of it. It was the same part of my brain that had once memorized the entire Gardasia Shana Act, and could still, if pressed, recite the conditions for lawful search and seizure in my sleep. Give me a system and a progression, and I will do the work. I've always been that way. I also discovered the expat scene, which one want to describe accurately and without condescension, because I'm aware of the irony of a man who became exactly what he describes, looking down at what he describes. The District 1 bars where you'd find retired British school teachers and Australian tradesmen and American divorcees and the occasional Canadian who seemed genuinely baffled by how he'd ended up there. Good men, a lot of them. Lonely men, most of them. Men who'd found something in Vietnam that their previous lives hadn't offered, and who were, some of them, managing that discovery well, and some of them not managing it at all. I was determined not to be a type. I want to be clear about that, because it matters to the story. I had thought about those men before I arrived. I'd seen enough of them in YouTube videos and expat forums, and I'd made myself a private promise that I was here differently. I was here with my eyes open. I was here on my terms, for practical reasons, with my critical faculties intact. The critical faculties were intact. That part was true. Chio Ishin is across the Saigon River from District 1, in what was then District 1, in what was then District 2, now Phu Duc City, if you want to be current. It's where a lot of the longer-term expats and wealthier Vietnamese professionals live. Nice restaurants. International schools. Rooftop bars that wouldn't look out of place in any city in Europe. A Canadian lad named Patrick from my apartment building had been there 6 months and knew the area well. He invited me across one Tuesday evening in late June, said there was a bar he liked, good view, not too loud. I had no reason to say no. I want to describe Mai the way I actually saw her that night, not the way I later revised her. She was sitting at the bar when we arrived, with a colleague of hers, a woman about the same age. She was 34, I'd find out later, though she could have been anywhere between 30 and 40. She was wearing a dark blue blouse, and she had a glass of something with ice in it, and she was laughing at something her colleague had said, not performing the laugh, actually laughing. Patrick knew her slightly. They'd met at some building management meeting, he said. He introduced us. She shook my hand. Her English was excellent, American inflected, the kind you get from years of films and series rather than from a classroom. She asked where I was from. I said Limerick. She said she didn't know Limerick. I said most people didn't. She asked what I'd done before I came here. I said I'd been a guard. She asked what a guard was. I explained. She said, "So you watched people for a living?" And I said, more or less, yes. She seemed to find this interesting rather than intimidating, which was not the most common reaction I'd encountered. I tried, at some point in the evening, to use some of my Vietnamese on a passing waiter. I attempted to say the beer was very good, root and gone. I said something that Patrick later told me sounded like I was asking about furniture. The waiter looked at me with professional patience. Mai translated without being asked. The waiter laughed. She laughed. After a moment, I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed at myself in, I couldn't tell you how long. The evening ended around 10. She had work in the morning, she said. She gave me a business card. Property coordinator, the firm's name, a number. Said if I had questions about the rental market, the purchase market, any of that, she was happy to help. Standard professional courtesy. I thanked her. She and her colleague got into a grab car. Patrick and I walked back toward the bridge. I have thought about that walk many times since. The river lit up, the night still warm, the city doing what it does, alive in a way that feels almost aggressive if you're coming from somewhere that went quiet at 9. I wasn't thinking about Mai particularly. I wasn't thinking about Sinead, or Bridget, or the flat above the chipper. I wasn't thinking about anything much. I was just walking, slightly warm from the beer, with the business card in my shirt pocket. I ask you this genuinely. When's the last time you had a good reason to be somewhere? Because that was what I had. That Tuesday night, crossing back into District 1. A good reason to be exactly where I was, not escaping something, not chasing something, just present. I kept the card. The following Tuesday, I rang the number on it. I want to be upfront about what this chapter of the story is, because I think it's the most important one, and also the easiest to misread. This is not the chapter where one described falling for someone and losing my head. I didn't lose my head. I didn't lose my head. I didn't lose my head. I kept my head throughout. I was watchful and considered, and I applied the judgment of a man who had spent nearly 3 decades professionally assessing people in high-stakes situations. And I got it comprehensively wrong. Because I was watching for the wrong things. I rang the number on the card on a Tuesday afternoon, 1 week after Tuan. I had prepared a question about leasehold structures for foreign buyers. I'd read enough on expat forums to construct something that sounded credible. It was not a very good question. Looking back, it was the kind of question a man asks when he's already decided on the answer he wants and is looking for permission to want it. Mai answered it clearly and professionally, said there were a few things she could explain better in person, and suggested coffee that weekend if I was free. I was free. We met at a cafe in Thoreau-Jean on a Saturday morning. Vietnamese coffee, the kind that comes in a glass with condensed milk thick at the bottom and ice, which I'd been drinking every day for 3 months and still found remarkable. She was on time, had a notebook, and we talked about property law for 40 minutes. She was knowledgeable. She was clear. She didn't try to sell me anything. That was the first item in what I will now describe, with full awareness of the irony, as my evidence file. The evidence file I was building in my head, the informal one, the copper's ledger, was a list of reasons she wasn't what I'd been warned about. The type of woman who targets expat men, who moves fast and asks early and pushes hard. Maya did none of those things. That was item 1. She was never early to be interested. If anything, I was ahead of her, not the reverse. Item 2, she split bills. Every time. I tried to pay at that first coffee, and she put a 200,000 dong note on the table before I got my wallet out. I told her that wasn't necessary. She said she knew it wasn't. That was the exchange. She paid her half. I paid mine. This happened consistently for the first 2 months. Item 3. The declined trip. In August, I suggested a weekend in Fukuoka. I'd heard it was good. I wanted to go. I thought she'd enjoy it. She said she couldn't. She had a site visit that weekend for work. She was sorry. She wasn't overly apologetic about it. She just couldn't make it. A woman running a script, I told myself, doesn't decline a weekend away. A woman running a script accelerates contact, not reduces it. Item 4, and this one I find most telling in retrospect, she occasionally disagreed with me, not aggressively. But if I said something she thought was wrong, she'd say so. Once I made some comment about Vietnamese traffic being dangerously unregulated, and she said, quite flatly, that the accident rate per capita was lower than Ireland's, and I might want to check my assumptions. I checked. She was right. I found this, I'm going to be honest here, attractive. Not in a romantic sense specifically. In the sense that I'd spent 4 years in Limerick, where everyone was very careful with me, the way people are careful with a man who's had a rough time, and here was someone who just talked to me like a person. Item 5, and this is the one I need you to pay attention to. She never once asked me about money. Not my pension, not what I had saved, not what I was living on. Not whether I was thinking of buying property, beyond that first conversation, for weeks. The subject just didn't come up from her end. I took this as evidence of character. I was wrong about what it evidenced. What it evidenced, I understand now, was patience. A professional patience. The question of money would come. It didn't need to come yet. By September, we were having dinner together 2 or 3 times a week. She knew a place in Bien Chin, Chu Dien, Com Tam, broken rice with pork, the kind of meal that cost about €1.80 and that I would happily have eaten every day for the rest of my life. We'd sit outside, motorbikes going by on the street, the smell of grilling pork from the kitchen, and talk. About her work, about the city, about Ireland when she asked about it, which she did with what seemed like genuine curiosity. She'd grown up and seen tea in the Mekong Delta, come to the city at 22 for university, stayed for work. She had a mother and a younger sister still in CNT. She visited when she could. I want to say something carefully here, because I don't want to reduce this to a transaction before it was one. There was real companionship in those months. The feeling of having someone in your day who is interested in what you think and tells you honestly when you're wrong. I'm not going to dress it up as love. I don't know what it was. I know what it felt like, and what it felt like was the opposite of being parked. It felt like being somewhere, with someone, for a reason. And after 4 years in the flat above the chipper watching GAA matches I didn't care about, I will not pretend that meant nothing. It meant a great deal. That's the truth of it. And I won't walk it back. In late September, her mother in Cincy became unwell. A hospital admission, something with her heart, not a crisis, but serious enough to need tests and a short stay. Maya mentioned it over dinner one evening, not dramatically, just as information. Said she was going down at the weekend to see her. I asked if she needed anything. She said she was fine, thank you. I said if there was a financial shortfall with the hospital, I'd be happy to help. She said she didn't want to ask that of me. I said she hadn't asked. There was a pause. She said the bills might come to around 45 million dong. I did the rough maths in my head, about 17 or 1800 euro. She said she had most of it, there was just a gap, she'd sorted herself. I told her I'd transfer her 1600 and she could sort the rest. She said that was too much. I said it was fine, she said she'd pay it back. I said whenever, no rush. I want to be precise here, because precision matters. I was not coerced. I was not manipulated in any overt way. She raised the subject, I was not manipulated in any overt way. She raised the subject, mentioned a figure, expressed reluctance to accept help, and accepted it when I persisted. I've run that sequence through my head many times since, looking for the mechanism, and the honest answer is that there isn't one I can point to with certainty. What I can tell you is that I offered before she finished the sentence. She didn't need to close the door. I walked through it on my own. The 1600 euro became the first line item in what I should have been tracking as a running total, but wasn't. The motorbike I bought the following month, cash, from a man Patrick knew, 1200 euro. I filed under personal expenses, not under my at all, because it was my idea and nothing to do with her. The weekend in Hainan in October, flights and hotel, about €900, my suggestion. Her colleague's birthday dinner in November, 4 of us at a restaurant in District 3. I insisted on paying because it would have been awkward not to. Probably €300 all in. At no point did I sit down and add these up. Agartha, who had spent hundreds of hours building case timelines and financial trails, did not keep a basic running total of his own expenditure over 4 months. That is what I mean when I say it was my first professional failure. Not the money itself, the methodology. I would never have let that gap exist in a case file. I let it exist in my life. By the end of October, the total was somewhere around €8,000. I know this now because I reconstructed it later, line by line, from my bank records. At the time, I had no clear figure. Each individual transaction had a reason. The sum of them did not have a watcher. It was a dinner in early November, the Com Tam place in Bien Thanh, the same table we usually took, that Mai mentioned, in the same tone she'd have mentioned the weather, that her company had just launched a new residential development. Mixed use, 8 floors, good location. She said foreigners could hold a 50-year leasehold under Vietnamese law. The regulations had been fairly clear on it since 2015. She said the units were reasonably priced for the area. She didn't look at me when she said it. She was eating. She moved on to something else about 30 seconds later. I didn't bite that night. But I thought about it walking home. And I thought about it the next morning over coffee. And 3 days later, over breakfast. I asked her to tell me more about the development. She sent me the brochure that afternoon. The brochure was good. I want to say that clearly, because I've had people imply that I must have been looking at something obviously dodgy and chosen to ignore it. That's not what happened. The brochure was professional. Clean design, quality printing, the kind of document you'd see from a mid-tier Irish property developer, floor plans, artist impressions, a location map showing Bien Thanh's proximity to the river in the city center, a breakdown of unit types and indicative pricing. It looked like what it was supposed to look like. I spent 3 weeks doing what I told myself was due diligence. I'm going to describe exactly what that consisted of, because this is where I owe you the most honesty. I read 2 websites, both expat forums, one aimed at English speakers in Ho Chi Minh City, one a broader Southeast Asia property resource. Both had overviews of the 2015 housing law that opened the Vietnamese market to foreign buyers, the 50-year leasehold structure, the cap on foreign ownership per development, the documentation requirements. I read these carefully. I understood the framework. I did not, at any point, consult an actual Vietnamese property lawyer. That distinction matters more than I can adequately express. I posted one message in the Vietnam expats Ho Chi Minh City Facebook group. The message asked whether anyone had experience with leasehold purchases in Bien Thanh and whether the process was straightforward for foreigners. I received one reply from a Belgian man named Mark who said he'd done something similar 18 months earlier in a development near the river, that the paperwork had been handled by the developer's firm, and that it had been fine. I did not ask Mark for the name of his development. I did not ask for his lawyer's contact. I did not ask for his lawyer's contact. I did not follow up with Mark at all. I read his reply, noted it as positive, and moved on. One data point, unverified, from a stranger on Facebook. I treated it as confirmation. I looked at the development company's website. It was well built, multiple pages, project gallery, a testimonial section with photographs, contact details, a registered address in BNA. Then AN. I did not check when the domain had been registered. If I had, I would have found it was 14 months old. I did not check. This is the thing you can do in 30 seconds with a free online tool that I have used in my professional life. I did not do it. I asked Mai to arrange a meeting with her colleague at the development office. His name was Than. We met on a Thursday morning in late October. The office was on the 3rd floor of a commercial building in Bien Thanh, about a 10-minute grab ride from the site itself. Reception area, a scale model of the development under glass, meeting table, glossy folders at each seat. The kind of setup that communicates, we are an established operation, we have invested in our presentation, we are not going anywhere. Don was in his late 30s, well-dressed, unhurried. His English was good, not perfect, but professional, precise, where precision mattered. He walked me through the development phase by phase, current construction status, projected completion, the leasehold structure and renewal terms, payment schedule. I noticed, and I have thought about this detail many times since, that the office smelled new. Not just clean, not new. Fresh paint and new, new. Fresh paint and new carpet, and the faint chemical smell of recently installed furniture. I registered it consciously, filed it under, recently opened, possibly relocated from another premises. I did not file it under, assembled specifically to receive people like me. Those are two different conclusions from the same observation, and I chose the wrong one. Toward the end of the meeting, I asked Than about independent legal representation, whether I should engage a Vietnamese property lawyer before proceeding. He was very measured in his response. He said the firm handled all documentation for foreign buyers as a standard service, that this was common practice in the Vietnamese market, that bringing in an outside lawyer mid-process sometimes created complications with the timeline and added costs that weren't necessary. His exact words, as best I can recall them, were, "We have done this many times. The process is clean. You are protected by the documentation we provide." It sounded like expertise. It was designed to sound like expertise. That evening, I asked Mai privately what she thought. She said Thon's firm had a solid reputation, that she'd referred buyers to them before without issues, that an independent lawyer would likely just duplicate work the firm was already doing and add a week to the timeline. She wasn't dismissive about it. She just agreed with Thon's assessment calmly and practically, the way she agreed with most things, not eagerly, just reasonably. I accepted this. I've described it since as the moment I handed over the wheel, and I think that's accurate. Not a dramatic moment, no single point where I can say, there. That's where I stopped thinking clearly. It was more like a series of small transfers of responsibility, each one individually logical, that added up to a position where the most important decision of my financial life was being managed by people I had no independent verification of. I let that happen. I was the one who let it happen. I wired €38,000 from the credit union on a Thursday afternoon in November 22. I did it from my phone, sitting in the apartment in District 1, and the transfer confirmation arrived about 40 minutes later. I remember looking at it for a long time, the finality of it. The way a large number looks different once it's moved, smaller somehow, and also more significant, both at once. The last time I'd felt that particular sensation was in 1998, signing the mortgage papers on the house in Dorodoyle with Sinead, the two of us sitting across from the solicitor, Sinead squeezing my hand under the table when the pen came out. That had been a decision that was moving us toward something. That was the feeling I recognized. Moving toward, not away from, not sideways, not standing still, toward. I visited the site the following Saturday. There were cranes. Real ones, operating. Workers on the scaffolding, concrete being poured into formwork on what looked like the 4th or 5th floor. The activity was unmistakably genuine. I stood on the pavement across the street and photographed it, the cranes, the workers, the building taking shape against the sky. I sent one of the photos to Aoi Fei on WhatsApp with a caption. I cannot tell you what the caption said. I know it was something that conveyed pride, something that said, "Look what your father has done." There was a voice, I should tell you, that spoke up around this time. Not loudly. It didn't announce itself. It was more like a pressure, a professional reflex, the thing that used to tap me on the shoulder in an interview room when a detail didn't line up right. It said, "You haven't spoken to an independent lawyer." It said, "You've done less verification on this than you do on a car purchase." It said, €38,000. I addressed this voice directly, which is perhaps the most incriminating thing I can tell you. I argued with it. I said, "I've checked the law. I've seen the office. I've met Thanom. I've seen the cranes." I said, if this were a con, it would have moved faster, would have been pushier, would have felt wrong in the ways I know how to recognize. I said, a man who has spent 28 years around criminals does not walk into one of their operations and feel nothing. And the voice, to its credit, said, that depends entirely on the quality of the criminal. I told it to shut up. The transfer had already gone. I went and had a beer on the rooftop of my building and watched the sun come down over the city and felt, despite the voice, like a man who had made a decision. An actual decision. Not a standing order. Not a microwave curry. A decision about property, about the future, about where the next chapter of his life was going to take place. That feeling was real. I won't pretend it wasn't. I just wish I'd earned it. Then handed over the keys to the unit in late January 2023. I say keys. It was a single key on a plain ring, the kind you'd use for a padlock, and the unit it opened was on the 6th floor of a building in Bien Thanh, about 8 minutes walk from where I'd stood on the pavement photographing cranes 2 months earlier. I want to tell you what I saw when I opened the door. Concrete. That's it. Bare concrete walls, concrete floor, a ceiling with exposed wiring hanging from it in 2 places, a window with no frame yet, just a rectangular hole with a temporary plastic sheet taped across it that moved in the breeze. No kitchen, no bathroom fittings. A toilet in the corner with no cistern and no seat. The air conditioning unit I'd been promised as part of the purchase was a hole in the wall above a bracket with no unit attached. Than had mentioned, when we signed the paperwork, the Vietnamese residential units were typically sold as shells. Buyers finished the interiors to their own specification. I had understood this in the abstract. I had not understood it as a concrete box with a hole where the window should be. I stood in the middle of this room for a few minutes. I looked around, and I thought, well, right then, this is the next thing. I want to be clear that the renovation problem felt solvable. I'm not a man who is easily discouraged by a practical challenge. I had a specific skill set. I could organize a process, I could manage a timeline, I could hold contractors accountable. What I did not have was any Vietnamese, any knowledge of the local construction market, or any means of getting independent quotes without going through someone who spoke the language. And Mai was standing beside me in that concrete box, already on her phone, already speaking to someone in rapid Vietnamese. Already, as she explained when she hung up, making some preliminary inquiries about tiling contractors. That's how it started. Not with a decision. With a phone call I couldn't participate in, to contractors I couldn't contact directly, arranged by someone who'd volunteered before I'd asked. This is the pattern. Things happen without quite being decided. I've thought about this a lot in the months since, how the renovation unfolded, and the consistent feature is that my involvement was always reactive, and Mai's was always initiating. She found the contractors. She obtained the quotes in Vietnamese, which she translated verbally for me. She managed the schedule. She communicated with Than's office about the contractor account, the preferred payment channel, she explained, which avoided complications with the development's internal billing system. I transferred money to a Vietnamese bank account number that Than's office provided. This was explained as standard. It sounded standard. I did not ask why standard practice involved payments to what was apparently a contractor account, rather than directly to the individual tradesman. I have since found the invoice template online. It's on a Vietnamese graphic design resource site, free to download. The font, the layout, the section headings, all of it. The invoices I received via WeChat, which Mai translated as they arrived, were built from that template. Some of them may have been for real work. I genuinely cannot tell you. What I can tell you is that the template is available to anyone with an internet connection in 5 minutes. The work itself looked real. That's the thing. I visited the unit 3 times over 11 weeks, and each time there was visible progress. The first visible progress. Time, there was visible progress. The second visit, the kitchen countertop installed, the overhead wiring tidied into conduit, the bathroom taking shape with a proper basin and a bath surround if not yet a bath. The third visit, 2 air conditioning units mounted and running, a ceiling fan turning slowly in the main room, a front door with a proper handle and a deadbolt. I photographed all of it. I sent photos to Awai. I felt, watching the place gradually become habitable, the solid, uncomplicated satisfaction of a project moving forward, of a thing being built. The total across 11 weeks was just under 19,000 euro. I have the bank records. I have the WeChat messages. I have the translated invoice summaries, Mai forwarded. Looking back now, There are 3 invoices for electrical work that don't correspond to any electrical work I can account for during my visits. There is a tiling invoice for an amount that seemed high for the area covered. I did not query any of this at the time. Each amount arrived with an explanation and a translated invoice. I transferred and moved on. In March, I asked Mai whether I could bring in an independent contractor to quote for the remaining bathroom work in the second bedroom. I had a reason that I thought was reasonable. I wanted to compare costs. She didn't push back. She thought about it for a moment and then said, quite practically, that it was my right to do that, but that introducing outside contractors mid-renovation would void the development's structural warranty on the work already completed. She said it was the same clause that applied to all units. That Thon's firm was particular about it, that she'd seen buyers run into issues before. I accepted this. I did not reread my purchase documentation to check whether a structural warranty clause existed. It did not. I know this now. I did not know it then because I had stopped reading the documentation the day after I received it, having satisfied myself that the headline terms were as agreed. The rental pivot came in April, floated over dinner at the Comtam place. It was a reasonable proposal on its face. The short-term rental market in Vientiane was strong. I knew this from my own research. It was a desirable location for business travelers and weekenders from other Vietnamese cities. Mai had experience managing short-term listings, she said. She'd done it for colleagues before. I was planning to go back to Ireland in June to see Aoife, who I hadn't seen in 8 months. Why not have the apartment earning while I was away? 20% management fee, standard. The initial outlay, furnishings, linen, photography for the listing, platform registration fees, she estimated at around €11,000. She could manage all of it. I just needed to provide the capital. I transferred €6,500 before my flight. I want to tell you about the morning I left for Tan Son Nhat Airport in June 2023. I had been in Vietnam for 15 months. I had, I believed, a condo in Bien Thun, bought, renovated, and now being set up as a short-term rental that would generate income while I was gone. I had a woman who was managing the operation for a fair commission. My pension covered my running costs in Limerick, with money to spare. I would visit Aoife, spend a few weeks at home, and come back in the autumn to an apartment that had been earning in my absence. I sat in the back of a grab car heading to the airport in the early morning, the city still half asleep, the streets quieter than I'd ever seen them, a few food carts setting up, a man hosing down the pavement outside a restaurant. I sent Maya a WhatsApp from the car, something brief, the flight time, that I'd be in touch when I landed, that I hoped the listings went smoothly, practical, warm enough, the kind of message you send someone you trust with something that matters. She replied with 2 words, safe flight. I landed in Shannon at 6 in the morning. Bridget was waiting at arrivals, the only person there at that hour, in her good coat, looking at me the way she'd been looking at me since we were children, like she was deciding whether to say the thing she was thinking. She asked how I was. I told her I was absolutely grand. And as I said it, standing in Shannon Airport with my carry-on bag, the smell of Irish winter coming in through the automatic doors, I meant it for the first time and longer than I could clearly remember. I went back to the flat above the chipper, made tea, slept for 12 hours. Started the slow recalibration of being home, Bridget's Sunday calls now in person. Aoife, coming down from Dublin the second weekend, the chipper smell that I'd been away from long enough to notice again. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday night at about midnight, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of Jameson, because old habits have a long memory, my phone buzzed with a Facebook notification. A message from Sion Connolly in Cork. We crossed paths on a Garda pension forum a while back, exchanged the odd comment. A retired NBCI man, not a close friend. I hadn't heard from him in months. The message contained a link and a single line of text. Deck, probably nothing. But you said Bien Thuen, yeah? I opened the link. It was a Vietnamese consumer protection forum, the kind of site that exists in every country, where people post warnings about bad landlords and dodgy contractors and financial schemes that cost them money they couldn't afford to lose. The Google translation was rough, the kind where sentence structures collapse and proper nouns survive intact, and everything else becomes approximate. I read slowly. The first entry was from a Dutch man. His name was given as Eric, 58, retired. The time frame was about 8 months before my own purchase. The development address in Bien Thane was listed. Same street. I read it twice, told myself, coincidence. Vietnam had a lot of residential development. Bien Thane was a desirable district. Similar schemes, different operators. I was not yet alarmed. I read the second entry. A New Zealander, 61, named as David. Different time frame again. But the street address was identical to mine. The coordinator's name, not Than exactly, but close enough, a variant that could be a different romanization or a different alias. And the sale process described in the post, translated clumsily but recognizably, was the same structure. The professional office, the glossy folders, the documentation handled internally, the renovation through the developer's preferred account. I was reading more carefully now. My chest had done something I couldn't quite categorize. Not panic, not yet. A stillness, more like. The stillness of a man who has spent his career knowing what it feels like when information starts pointing in one direction. And then I reached the part about the coordinator. The New Zealander described the woman who had introduced him to the development. He described her manner, measured, professional, occasionally unavailable. Her English with an American accent from films, he wrote. Her way of listening that made you feel she was taking you seriously. And then he wrote, her exact words, on one of our first evenings, were, and I will try to give them as accurately as I can, "You are not like the others who come here." I put my phone down on the kitchen table. I looked at the wall. Those were her exact words to me. Sitting at the Com Tam place in Bien Thun, the smell of the grill and the motorbikes going by outside, and the condensation on the glasses. Her exact words. I picked the phone back up and read the sentence 4 times to be certain I wasn't translating it wrong in my head, finding a pattern that wasn't there. I wasn't. It was there. What followed over the next 3 hours was the most competent police work I had done in 3 years. I am aware of how that sounds. I am aware of the bitter precision of it. I checked the development company's website domain registration 14 months before my purchase date. I had known this tool existed. I had not used it. I used it now, at 1 in the morning, in a flat above a chipper in Limerick, for a transaction already 18 months old. I found the Vietnamese business registry online and searched for the firm's registered name. No exact match. Variants, adjacent names, nothing that cleanly corresponded. I searched Thon on LinkedIn. The profile existed. Created 7 months before our meeting. 11 connections. No employment history before the current role. No education listed. The photograph showed a man in a suit who could have been anyone. I screenshotted everything, organized it into a folder on my phone the way I'd have organized evidence in a case. Date. Date stamped, dot labeled. The professional muscle memory doing what it was built to do, 8 months too late. Then I tried Mai's number. The international dialing tone rang twice and cut to a disconnected signal. I tried WhatsApp. Her profile was still there. Last seen, June 9th. The day after I flew out, I tried Thon's WeChat. Account not found. I rang Sign Connolly at 2:30 in the morning. He picked up on the 3rd ring, which told me he'd been expecting the call. We talked for 90 minutes. Sign had spent 24 years in the National Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and he knew what he was looking at before I'd finished the second paragraph. He walked me through the structure of it, not dramatically, the way a former NBCI man doesn't dramatize anything, just clinically and completely. The long-game relationship build, the manufactured legitimacy, the office, the brochure, the scale model, the working construction site, which almost certainly belonged to a genuine development they had no connection to. The gradual financial escalation designed to feel like the buyer's own decision at each stage, ... The renovation as a mechanism for additional extraction, some work real, some not, impossible to audit from the outside. The rental pivot as a final draw before exit. He used a term I hadn't heard before. I won't repeat it here, because it's become a shorthand that doesn't capture what it actually is, which is a patient, organized, industrial-scale fraud operation targeting lonely men with savings. He said it was common in Southeast Asia. He said it was getting more sophisticated. He said the property vector was relatively recent, a refinement on earlier versions that used cryptocurrency investment schemes. I listened. I am a very experienced listener. This was one of the worst conversations of my life. I flew back to Ho Chi Minh City in July. I didn't tell Bridget why. I told her there was a property matter I needed to resolve in person. She didn't push. She gave me the look again at the airport. I got on the plane. The development office address on the third floor of the commercial building in Bien Thanh was now occupied by a printing business. Banners, signage, a large format printer running in the back. The woman who ran it was in her 60s, small, and when I walked in and showed her the address on my phone, she looked at me with an expression I have no adequate single word for. It was recognition and sorrow and a kind of weary inevitability. She had seen this before. She didn't speak English, but she shook her head slowly and pointed at the floor. Here, now, this is what's here, and then held out her hands, empty. Gone. I found the building, found the floor, found the door number from my own documentation. I knocked. A man in his 40s answered. Behind him in the apartment I could see a woman, two teenagers at a table doing homework, the television on low. They had lived there, he told me in careful English, for 4 years. His family. He had never heard of the development company. He had never heard of Thane. He looked at the documentation I showed him with an expression that told me he had not heard of those names in the specific way that means, I know exactly what has happened to you, and I am sorry, and there is nothing I can do. I went to the district police station. I sat down across a desk from an officer in his 30s, and I explained the situation. He listened carefully. He took notes. He listened carefully. He took notes. He asked clarifying questions in good English. He was professional and polite and patient. And then he explained, not unkindly, that cases of this nature were very difficult to prosecute, that the amounts, while significant, sat in a jurisdictional gray area between civil and criminal, that the entities involved had likely been dissolved, that he would log the report, but that I should consult a lawyer about civil remedies and should not expect a criminal investigation to result. I have given that same speech, in its Irish law equivalent, to at least 30 people over the course of my career. I know every word of it. I know the careful kindness of it. I know what it means. I thanked him and left. I hired a Vietnamese lawyer the following week, a referral from a contact at the Irish embassy who handled consular cases. She reviewed my documentation over 2 weeks. The leasehold papers were not registered with any land authority. The company's seal on the purchase agreement was irregular. The format used had been discontinued by Vietnamese authorities 3 years before my purchase. The bank account that had received the renovation transfers led to a dissolved shell company, registered 2 years before my arrival, and wound up 4 months after I flew out. We met at a coffee shop in District 1 to go through her findings. She was thorough and measured and chose her words carefully. She said there were no viable legal remedies she could identify within the Vietnamese civil system, given the dissolved entities and unregistered documentation. She said I should be aware that the leasehold certificate I held was, and here she paused briefly, not worth the paper. She said it gently. I gave her what she charged, which was entirely fair, and I thanked her for her time. I flew back to Limerick. I did not ring Bridget from the airport. I did not ring Otwife. I went back to the flat, made tea I didn't drink, and opened the credit union app on my phone. I looked at the balance for a long time. Then I put the phone face down on the table and sat in the dark with the chipper smell coming up through the floor and the distant sound of someone's television next door. And I thought about what I was going to do next. I spent 6 weeks in Limerick, the longest stretch I'd been back since I'd left. The flat was exactly as I'd left it. The same damp smell under the chipper smell. The same view out the kitchen window, the Ennis Road, the same cars parked in the same spots. The same man from number 14 walking his dog at the same time every morning with the same expression of a man who has accepted his lot and is not entirely miserable about it. I found this, not comforting exactly, but stable. Something that wasn't moving. Bridget rang on Sundays, same as always, except now she rang the flat's landline because I'd told her the mobile signal was unreliable, which was not true. I just needed the option to not answer. She knew. She didn't push. That's Bridget. Awife came down from Dublin the second weekend. We had dinner, the two of us, at a restaurant on the docks she likes. At some point she asked about the condo, the way you ask about something when you already know the answer isn't going to be good. I told her it hadn't worked out. that I'd lost some money on a property deal that turned out to be less legitimate than it appeared. She asked how much. I told her 35,000, which is roughly half the real number. I watched her face absorb it. She said she was sorbet. She said she was sorry. She said was, I all right? I said I was grand, which is what you say in that situation. And we moved on to talking about her job and her flatmate and whether she was seeing anyone, which she deflected in the exact same way I deflect Bridget's questions about my well-being. And I noticed this, but did not comment on it. I did not tell Bridget anything. I knew precisely what would happen if I told Bridget. She would respond with exactly the right amount of concern, delivered with exactly the right amount of warmth, and I would not be able to bear it. Sympathy, when you believe you don't deserve it, is a particular kind of punishment. I was not ready for it. I went to Mass once, not from faith. That ship sailed a long time ago, somewhere around year 15 of Henry Street. The first went because I needed to sit somewhere quiet for an hour without anyone speaking to me or expecting me to speak back. The church on the Ennis Road, the 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, half empty, the particular silence of a building designed to hold more people than are in it. I sat near the back. I didn't pray exactly. I just sat. It helped slightly. I have no theological explanation for this. The drinking. I had been drinking more than was sensible for a long time. Since the divorce, if I'm being precise, which I am now trying to be about everything. More again in Vietnam. The heat and the availability and the social lubrication of it. The way a beer at the end of a hot day feels like a reward you've earned simply by existing in a warm country. More again in the months after I found out, back in Limerick, the Jameson at midnight becoming the Jameson at 10, the Jameson at 7 with the dinner. The bottle going down faster than the weeks were going by. There was no dramatic moment, no rock bottom that announces itself with a crash. There was a Tuesday morning in September 2023 when I got up early, went to the bathroom, weighed myself on the scale I hadn't used in 6 months, and looked in the mirror for a long time. The man looking back at me was not someone I recognized as the person I understood myself to be. I thought, this is not who you are. I stopped that day. I treat it the way I treat everything, as a procedural matter. One day, then the next. No sentimentality about it, no narrative of redemption. I don't drink. That's the policy. 4 months now. Let me give you the numbers, because I think you're owed the numbers clearly. €76,000 gone. That's the total across all 4 stages, reconstructed from my bank records. €19,000 remaining in savings. The pension is intact, $2,100 a month, unchanged, which covers the District 7 apartment here in Ho Chi Minh City, with something left over if I'm careful. I am now careful. I have a spreadsheet. I check it every Sunday morning over coffee, which is the most belated possible application of a skill I have had my entire adult life. I am aware of the absurdity of this. I am doing it anyway. I came back to Vietnam in October 2023. I want to address this directly because it's the thing people find most difficult to understand, including Bridget, who asked me 3 times in one phone call if I was sure, and Aoi Fei, who went quiet in a way that said more than questions would have. Here is the only answer I have. Limerick is the place where I am the man who lost. It is the place where I am the version of Declan Mulrian that Cine had left. They couldn't find a reason to get off the sofa for 4 years. They got taken for €76,000 by people who were better at their jobs than I was at mine. Vietnam, for all that it cost me, is still the place where I woke up. I am not confusing those two things anymore. I know exactly what Vietnam is now and what it isn't. But I'm not ready to go back to being parked. That is the most honest answer I have. I live in District 7 now. A smaller apartment, cheaper, quieter than the old one, no rooftop bar in the building, no Canadian lad down the hall. A ceiling fan that works, a kitchen I actually use, a window that looks out over a street market that sets up every morning at 6. I have a coffee place 3 minutes walk away, where the woman who runs it knows my order and has stopped trying to overcharge me for it, which I take as a sign of acceptance. I have a Vietnamese tutor. Her name is Phung. She's 22, a university student, and she is genuinely exasperated by my Limerick pronunciation in a way I find encouraging. We meet 3 mornings a week. I'm not doing 10 words anymore. I'm doing it properly, the way I should have done it from the start, with grammar and tones and the actual structure of the language, rather than a set of index cards in my shirt pocket. I approach it like a job. It's the only way I know how to approach things. I have two friends, a retired German engineer named Klaus who lives in my building and who communicates primarily through observations about construction quality and the weather, and a Vietnamese man named Hong, my age, who runs a hardware shop near the market and who has taught me more practically useful Vietnamese in 3 months of transactions than I learned in a year of index cards. Neither of these relationships involves property, romance, or financial transactions. I consider this progress. Now, there is something I want to say about Mai. I have thought about her more carefully than is probably healthy over the past year. Not from anger, I want to be clear about that. Anger requires believing the other person owed you something different, and I no longer believe that framing is useful. What I have done is tried to understand, with the forensic neutrality I can apply when I'm not the subject of the investigation, what she actually was. She was professional. She was professional. She was patient beyond what most people are capable of sustaining. She was, in the months I knew her, genuinely good company, and I don't think that was entirely performance, though I acknowledge I am not a reliable judge of that. She was almost certainly doing this to other men when I met her, and is almost certainly doing it to other men right now. I have no way to stop that. The only thing I can do is say it clearly, on camera, to whoever is watching, and hope that the Dutch man and the New Zealander and whoever else is on that forum find it a small comfort that someone is saying it out loud. I don't understand her in any way that gives me peace. I've stopped trying. So, 3 things. Not 10, not a listicle, not a YouTube title card. 3 things that cost me 76,000 euro to learn and that I'm giving to you for free. The first, the absence of red flags, is not evidence of safety. It may be evidence of skill. The things that weren't there, the pushiness, the early requests, the inconsistencies, were absent because they had been deliberately removed. A clean scene isn't always a safe scene. Sometimes it just means someone cleaned it before you arrived. The second, a man who believes his professional experience makes him immune to manipulation, is a man who has already lowered his guard. I spent 28 years becoming confident in my judgment. That confidence, in the end, was the door they walked through. The lock I thought was the strongest turned out to be the one they had the key for. The third, loneliness, is not a character flaw. I want to say that carefully because I've had people, online, after I started talking about this, suggest that loneliness is a kind of stupidity, a weakness you should have overcome. It isn't. It's a human condition. But it is a financial vulnerability, and anyone who appears to address both your loneliness and your need for purpose at the same time in one neat package deserves your most careful and most skeptical attention, not your contempt, your attention. So, was the condo a stupid idea? The condo was a symptom. Sort the symptom. You haven't sorted the thing. I'm still sorting it. I'm sitting in a District 7 apartment at 54 years old with 19,000 euro in savings, a pension, a Vietnamese tutor who thinks my pronunciation is a personal affront, and a spreadsheet I check every Sunday. I have not told my sister the full number. I have a glass of water on the table instead of a Jameson. I'm grand. That's Declan Mulrian. 54, from Limerick, still here. There's a specific type of fraud operating throughout Ho Chi Minh City and Da Nang that targets Western men of retirement age, or approaching it, men with savings, pensions, and the particular vulnerability that comes from starting over somewhere unfamiliar. It combines long-game relationship building with property investment as the financial vehicle. It is professional, patient, and increasingly sophisticated. The construction site is real. The office is real. The office is real. The relationship feels real. The leasehold document is not. If you are considering buying property in Vietnam as a foreign national, the law does permit it under specific conditions: 50-year leaseholds, caps on foreign ownership per development, registration requirements. These protections exist on paper and they are real, but they only protect you if you engage an independent Vietnamese property lawyer before you transfer a single euro or dollar, not a lawyer recommended by the developer, not a verbal assurance from someone you trust. An independent lawyer. It will cost you a few $100s in several days. It will cost you considerably less than 76,000 euro. Declan's story isn't about Vietnam. Vietnam is full of people living honest lives, building real things, running legitimate businesses, welcoming strangers with a warmth that is genuine. His story is about what happens when a man who has spent his life being certain steps into uncertainty and lets the relief of feeling alive again override the instincts that kept him safe for 30 years. That's not a Vietnam problem. That's a human problem. Vietnam just happened to be where it found him. If you're planning to move, if you're planning to buy, if you're thinking about starting over somewhere, that impulse is not foolish. Declan would be the first to tell you that. He'd also tell you to get a lawyer, keep a spreadsheet, and never, under any circumstances, tell the voice in your head to shut up. This has been Inside Vietnam. The due diligence resource guide for foreign property buyers in Vietnam is in the description below. Use it. Stay careful.